Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon Goldstein, and I'm the Director of Day School Programs at Gateways, and I want to welcome you to our final webinar in our mental health series. Our mission at Gateways is to provide high-quality special education services, expertise, and support to enable students with diverse learning needs to succeed in Jewish educational settings and participate meaningfully in Jewish life. Gateways has expanded our programming in the area of mental health and wellness, with goals to raise awareness, decrease stigma, and provide tools to support our young people who are struggling with mental illnesses. We offer educational trainings to parents and educators. We partner with the Brookline Center for Mental Health to bring mental health clinicians into the local Jewish day schools to provide individual therapy with students and offer wellness programming. And we have established a bridge program in 2 of the local day schools for students in need of additional mental health support. We are so grateful to the Miriam Fund of Combined Jewish Philanthropies for sponsoring this important webinar series over the last 3 years. We have held 15 webinars over the last 3 years, addressing many different topics in the area of mental health. While this grant is ending, we are planning to provide some additional webinars and speakers next year, so we will still encourage you to complete the survey at the end of this webinar, both to give us feedback about the webinar and to let us know about any other topics that you might be interested in hearing. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Rachel Shine, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. It is hard to believe that this series is coming to an end, and we are so thrilled to have 2 wonderful speakers with us today. I am Dr. Rachel Shine. As Sharon said, I have been coordinating this webinar series over the last 3 years. So I'm going to introduce both of our speakers, and then first Deja will share her story, and then when she's done, I will turn it over to Jodee, who is with us. But let me provide you with a little bit of information about both Deja and Jodee. So Deja Williams is an 18-year-old who currently resides in, I should have asked you how to say this first, Apopka. Is that correct?
It's Apopka.
Apopka, okay, Florida. Having graduated from high school 1 year ago, she is the youngest of 4 girls in her family, as well as the only daughter home alongside her parents. As of now, Deja has 2 books in the works and is currently learning 3 languages, Mandarin, French, and Korean, and is just weeks away from moving to Los Angeles, California to pursue her modeling and dancing career. After years of being bullied in grade school, the journey to finding success in these things she loves doing has begun, starting with telling her story. So after we hear from Deja, we will then hear from Jodee Blanco, who will talk with us. Jodee Blanco is the author of the seminal New York Times bestseller, Please Stop Laughing at Me, which I actually read as a young individual, that established her as an anti-bullying's first voice. One of education's most trusted experts, she has presented to thousands of students, teachers, and parents. Administrators turn to her regularly for professional development and to implement her anti-bullying programs in their schools. She also consults on enlightened communication practices and crisis management for schools. In addition to her memoir, she has written multiple other successful books, a series of critically acclaimed white papers on bullying, and taught at the University of Chicago and at NYU. The media uses her regularly as a resource, and her life story has been featured in hundreds of newspapers in the US and abroad. Her anti-bullying program that consists of live presentations, extensive professional development, and a comprehensive curriculum continues to redefine the possibilities for curbing suffering in schools worldwide. So we are so thrilled to have both Deja and Jodee with us today. And I'm first going to turn it over to Deja to share her story with us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deja, but I usually go by Deja Montoya when talking about my story. And the reason I do that is because Montoya is my middle name. And for a long time, I've been bullied by my middle name, but I'm starting to embrace it now. The piece I will be sharing today is called You Don't Know, and I hope you guys can see my sincerity for what it is. You don't know what I've been through. He doesn't know, and she doesn't know, and they don't know. No idea, and no clue, and no wonder of the cries, and the pleas, and the begs. My insecurity, my judgments, my non-existent confidence. You don't know. My name is Deja, and you just don't know. 我非常爱看书，我没办法了。I can't be someone who doesn't speak Chinese, or someone who can keep an indoor voice, who's normal or who fits in. My name is Deja. Who else do you want me to be? I've tried so long to be someone else, but I don't know who. I felt lost, and anything I did was wrong in their eyes. If I bought lunch to school, it would be seaweed or noodles, and they would take it from my hands and eat it or throw it on the ground. That day, I had nothing to eat. And I'm sorry if I'm an immature teenager who cries too much, but it's literally all I know to do. For years, no one could see my tears. Or maybe they just ignored them. Maybe I just ignore my own tears. But why? They gave me the attention that I wanted, but the words that I didn't. I'd rather have been insulted than to be alone. I had grown to be so casted out that I was desperate for anyone to be by my side. Like if having the Nazi symbol drawn on me meant I would be spoken to, I'd allow it. I would try different personas, eyebrow fill, colorful eyeshadow, bright red lipstick, lash extensions, new hobbies, words, slang, anything that I heard other teenagers use. But it never was enough. At the end of the day, I was still that same weak person in everyone's eyes. I was weird, abnormal, strange, just a Black girl who was an Asian wannabe, obsessed, loud, obnoxious, and not wanted. But was that really who I was? Or was I just Deja? Am I just Deja? The girl who sat alone in the bathroom for lunch, calling my mom on the phone so I would have someone to talk to, so that I wouldn't be alone, because that's all I ever was, alone. Like I was trapped forever in a room, in a cage, in a wall, and no one ever wanted to visit me. They laughed at me, spoke about me, called me Fruit Loops because I had colorful hair. They recorded videos of some girl calling me a tall A, ugly A, stupid A, B. And I was only 11 years old. She would speak loudly whenever she was near me, boasting about her relationship with my crush. She sent malicious messages to my phone using her friend's phone. I was just Deja. She didn't know. My first grade teacher didn't know. She didn't know that I was telling the truth, that I was pushed by another student, that I was being lied on. I begged her to believe me, but she never did. She never knew. She still doesn't know. The girl who provokes me know though. And so does the boy who tried pressuring me into sending nudes. And the girl who threatened me behind my back, and even the boys who pushed me down the stairs. They all knew who I was and who I am. And that's why they bullied me. And that's why they hurt me. I never did anything to them, but they knew how special I was, like a rose growing out of concrete, how talented I was, but did I know? Not then, but I do now. You don't, though. So I'm telling you who Deja is. They've been telling me who I am this whole time, and it's my turn. I can be weird, but I'm different, like a rainbow eucalyptus, I can be strange, but I'm inimitable, like the purest gem in a cave. I'm not perfect, but I am precious, like a dainty rose in the middle of a storm. I speak Chinese, I sew, I model, I dance, I'm loud, and they think I'm awesome. I've always shined my way through every fake persona I tried to wear, and no one can use me against me anymore. After spending so much time with myself in quarantine, I've grown to love the way I spam my keyboard when writing a new story. I learned to love how I smile when singing in a foreign language. I love the way I think and talk and act and laugh. I love it all. I love me. And this is who I am. I'm Deja. I am who I am, and this is who I want to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deja. That was absolutely beautiful, and I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. I am thrilled now to turn the webinar over to Jodee, who will talk with us. We will be doing question and answers at the end, so feel free to put them in the Q&A and or in the chat, and I will feed them to Jodee after she is done speaking with us.
Hi, everyone. Deja, first of all, I have to tell you that that was extraordinarily courageous and more beautiful than cool moving water. And as I listened to you, it was as if I was listening to myself at your age, because I'm 59 now, but from 5th grade through high school, I went through the same things you did. And when you talked about eating alone in the bathroom at lunch, that is how I survived 4 years of lunch in high school. So not only do I think you're remarkable in your courage, in your ability to articulate your experiences and turn that pain into purpose, but I think you're going to set the world on fire, and you've already got a ginormous candle that you've lit and are carrying inside you. So congratulations for that, and thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jodee, and like Deja, I was the school outcast for the same reason Deja struggled and so many other kids do today, simply for being different. My school years were unspeakable. I never imagined that I would write about them, but about 20 some years ago, I decided it was time for me to tell my story. At the time I wrote my book, Please Stop Laughing at Me, the term bullying didn't even exist. It was called peer pressure. And in fact, every publisher that I pitched the book to rejected it. They all said the same thing. Bullying is a non-issue. There's no audience for this book. So I actually bullied a small publisher in Boston, of all places, into, because I know one of you is from Boston, into publishing the book. And within 48 hours, it was a New York Times bestseller. And suddenly, I found myself the voice of America's bullied, misunderstood kids. And I started getting hundreds of phone calls and correspondences from kids, some as young as 4th grade, threatening suicide, asking me for help. So I gave up my career in PR and I started traveling the nation's schools, doing something that would eventually evolve into a program called INJA. It's not just joking around, that consists of student presentations, professional development for faculty, parent seminars, curricula, and bullying intervention and support. And something really strange has happened along the way, and what I'll be sharing with you over the next hour. When I was being bullied, and Daisha will understand this, when I was going through it, there were certain things the adults in my life did, like my parents and teachers, that were helpful. But a lot of things they did made everything so much worse. And I never forgot those things. And as I started traveling America's schools doing my work, my anti-bullying work, I would interview kids, and I have interviewed thousands and thousands of kids ranging in age from kindergarten all the way through university. And I've asked them about their experiences and about the adults. And all of the complaints they've had about the adults in their lives were the same complaints that I had. And I realized the world may change. The world in which Deja lives now is very different than the world I lived in. But the heart of a child, the heart of an adolescent beats the same. That part hasn't changed. All kids long for acceptance, a sense of belonging. And if that's taken away from them, the long, deep, dark struggle back to self-acceptance can be gut-wrenching. So what I'm going to do over the next 50 minutes or so is I'm going to share with you all the things that your kids, your students, your patients, the children in your life, the teens in your life want you to understand about bullying and other things that are important to them, but they're either afraid to say them or perhaps they haven't been able to articulate them in a way that gets them the help they need. Sometimes I'll be speaking to you in the voice of an adult expert like I am now. Sometimes I'll be speaking to you in the voice of a tormented kid. You'll know the difference. And by the way, all of the tips and techniques and strategies that I'm going to be sharing with you are based on my own experiences growing up as a bullied adolescent, as well as what I've learned from working with students, teachers, parents, and being in the field for the last 24 years. And all of these tools that I'll be giving you are adjustable. They really work with any age child, whether you're in third grade or whether you're a junior in high school. You just simply adapt the application based on the age of the child, and you use your judgment in that adaptation. These are the things you should never say to a bully child, and why. Ignore the bully and walk away. Now, why is that counterintuitive? First of all, you're applying adult logic onto a kid circumstance. In the world of adults, if someone is annoying you at work and you ignore them, absolutely, they'll probably stop bullying you. They'll probably stop bothering you if you ignore them. In the world of kids, it's the opposite. The more a child ignores the bullies, the meaner the bullies will get until they elicit a response. There are two types of bullied kids. There are two types of popular kids in a school. The elite leader is the student who's popular and cool and has a lot of friends, but they're caring and inclusive. And then you have the elite tormentor. Be aware of the elite tormentors in your schools, everyone. These are often the kids who get good grades, raise their hands in class, volunteer for community service, thrive at extracurriculars, respect their elders, know what they want to do when they grow up. In fact, these are often the kids that the adults in the school will enlist as greeters at parent events. And no one ever suspects that these kids with these wonderful, ebullient demeanors are sending certain other students home in tears all the time. Not by virtue of the acts of unkindness they commit, more the subtle ways in which they deny acceptance. Well, if you've got a group of elite tormentors picking on an established target, someone who always gets picked on, and that target ignores them, they will only up the volume on their cruelty until they get a response. Also, what's the one thing we tell kids all the time? Don't be a bystander. If you see somebody getting bullied, stand up and defend that person. Then why is it we'll turn around and say to that very same child, oh, you're getting bullied? Just ignore it and walk away. Isn't that a mixed message? Aren't we in effect asking that child to be a bystander in his or her own life? The second thing you should never say to any bullied child is leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. There are two types of bullied kids in a school. Some kids are one or the other, others toggle back and forth between both types. The first is the overtly bullied. That's the student who's bullied in all the obvious ways. Then you have the invisible student. The invisible student isn't necessarily bullied per se. They're not even necessarily intentionally excluded or targeted. It's just that child who disappears into the woodwork, who other students look past and through instead of at, who gets talked about instead of talked to. And if you tell an invisible student, leave them alone and they'll leave you alone, what goes through that child's mind is, I don't want to be left alone. I don't want those kids to leave me alone. I want them to like me. I want them to include me. I don't want to be left alone. I'm already lonely. That's my problem. Grown-ups never understand anything. The third thing you should never say to a bully child, and this is the one that always bothered me the most. And I think every well-meaning adult, myself included, has probably said it once to a child. And yet, when I look back, and it bothered me the most, they're just jealous. It's just jealousy. They put you down to build themselves up. They're just jealous. Now, why is that deeply counterintuitive and tone deaf? The first thing that went through my mind that I would scream in my head every time a loving, well-meaning adult said that to me was, who cares why I don't fit in? That's all grown-ups ever do is blah, 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 and explain stuff. I don't want any more grown-up explanations. I just want to know what to do so I'm not stuck at home with my parents alone this weekend again. And I also used to wonder, why is it that the grown-ups always tell the kids who are being picked on things like rise above it, be the bigger person, turn the other cheek, don't give them the satisfaction? How come they never expect the mean kids to be the bigger people? How come we're always the ones expected to rise above it? Isn't it bad enough that I've got all this pressure just trying to get from math class to social studies without being spat on or worse? Now I've got to worry about being a bigger person and rising above it. Because if I don't, on top of the kids at school already hating me, the adults are going to be disappointed in me too. I hate adults. They never understand. Now, why is it that we find ourselves using that cliche on so many bullied, ostracized kids? Because we think if we can give this bullied or excluded child a reason why they don't fit in, that isn't personal, that isn't really about them, that they'll take what's happening less to heart and will feel better. And indeed, if we were getting bullied at work and a colleague did that for us, we would feel better. But once again, we're making that same mistake of imposing adult thinking onto kids, and it will never work. Every time an adult said to me, they're just jealous, I felt that much more alone, that much less understood. Now, why do we find ourselves telling the student this in addition to thinking that it will make them feel better? Well, we believe that this child, in a way, is mature enough to benefit from us saying they're just jealous. Now, it doesn't work because we're expecting that child to think like an adult, to think as we would. And no child can think or process emotion like an adult until they reach the biological age of their early to mid-20s, at which point the brain completes its development. Until then, until a child physically, neurologically completes adolescence, no child can process emotion like an adult. Now, most of us know this, especially if we work with kids, we all know this on some level. Then why is it we still find ourselves relying on that cliche? It's because we believe the adult child, whether it's our student or our own son or daughter, we believe that they're the exception to the emotional maturity rule. We believe that despite their young physical age, they are emotionally mature enough to feel better if we say to them they're just jealous. Why? The typical profile of the bullied student is why. Over the last 25 years, in my work inside schools, as well as my own experiences as a former bullied child, I've determined that there is definitely a typical profile of the bullied student. And almost every student I've met or worked with that's been bullied fits this profile. And the profile I call the ancient child. You guys know this kid. The ancient child is someone you might refer to as an old soul. The ancient child is the student who's typically more verbally, socially, and intellectually sophisticated than their classmates. They often have an amazing vocabulary and a gift with language. And in fact, when you're speaking to an ancient child, you have to pinch yourself and remind yourself that you're talking to a kid, because when they express themselves with such wisdom and clarity and sanguinity. The ancient child exhibits a capacity for empathy and compassion far beyond their years. Also, the ancient child struggles because they're too mature intellectually, verbally, and socially to really connect with their classmates, but they're too young biologically to socialize with adults. And so they find themselves in this sort of limbo. The ancient child is the child whose parents will say of him or her, oh, my kid is 13 going on 33. Or my kid will beg me to stay up late if I'm having an adult party because they have more in common socially and culturally with my adult friends than they do their classmates. The ancient child will tell you, it's okay if nobody will sit with me at lunch. They're too immature for me anyways. The ancient child sees the world through an adult lens. That's why they seem so mature on the outside, because they actually do see the world the way we do, but they still experience life and emotion in the biological reality of their own age. And we don't care why we don't fit in. We don't care why, the reason why no one will sit with us at lunch or invite us to their cool parties. We just want to know what to do so we don't have to be by ourselves anymore, so that the kids at school will accept us and like us. The fourth thing you should never say to a bully child, and there's lots of versions of this, but this is the one I always got. Jodee, 20 years from now, you are going to be a famous writer, and all these kids who are picking on you are going to be in jail or worse. And every time I heard that, I used to think to myself, who cares about 20 years from now? Who cares about when I'm older or when I'm in college? I heard now, I'm lonely now. To a kid, the future is after school and the distant future is Saturday. And the last thing you should never say to a bullied child if you're an adult is, I know how you feel. It never failed. I'd finally muster the courage to confide in a well-meaning adult, and the adult would listen for a few sentences, and then they'd interrupt and say, oh, Jodee, I know how you feel, sweetheart. When I was in 7th grade, and off they go. And I'd always wonder, How come every conversation with a grown-up always somehow ends up being about the grown-up's childhood? Grown-ups are so annoying. So what should you say and what should you do? Before I walk you through the steps of how to do an intervention with a bullied child, one-on-one and in a group, I want to walk you through a fundamental communications strategy or sort of construct that has been a game changer for me. Before I worked in the anti-bullying arena, I owned a company that did communications in the entertainment, publishing, and Fortune 100 arena. And I helped those that struggle to communicate with more grace and to be understood better, utilizing these basic fundamentals. And they can be applied in any communication situation in which you're seeking to lead with truth and compassion. There's a difference between authority and emotional credibility. Authority is what you have over someone or have over in a situation. Emotional credibility is different. Emotional credibility in communication is when the other person feels safe with you emotionally because they trust you to make good on your word. There are 3 tenets of emotional credibility in communication. And if you can integrate these tenets into your communications, they can deepen your credibility on so many levels in so many different types of situations, especially when communicating with adolescents. Tenet number 1, specificity. The more specific you are when you communicate to a kid, the more validated they feel. The more general you are, the more dismissed they feel. That's why so many kids can't stand it when an adult will say to them, "We'll see." Because they know that "we'll see" is often just grown-up speak for leave me alone and I don't want to be bothered right now. Now, in our defense as adults, when we say "we'll see," we're not trying to make this child feel dismissed. What we're trying to do is not commit to something on the fly and then have to disappoint this child later on. We want to be sure that we've considered everything, and if we do say yes, that we mean it and can follow through. But that's how we see it through our adult grown-up lens. Through the child's lens, this is how they interpret "we'll see." No fair. That's all you ever say is "we'll see," and it's no fair. And honestly, it's not all that fair. Here's an approach using the tool of specificity that illustrates its power. The next time a child is asking you for something and they're bugging you, not that any child in your life would ever bug you about anything, but on the off chance they are, try this instead. Instead of "we'll see," say to that child or adolescent, "I can't give you an answer right this second. I need time to process my decision. Let's you and I agree upon a time and a place where we'll reconvene and I'll give you my decision." Then you agree. So let's say it's tomorrow in the kitchen, okay? Or tomorrow in your living room, wherever, at 6 p.m. Then you say to the child, "Before we leave right now, I'd like you to explain to me specifically why this thing you're asking of me is so important to you." And then sit back and listen and let them explain. One of the biggest complaints, or the 3 biggest complaints that I get from kids when I interview them about their perspectives on adults are these 3 in this order. Number 1, grown-ups make me feel judged all the time. Number 2, grown-ups don't take me seriously enough. Number 3, grown-ups are always tired. That last one always makes everybody chuckle, but the deeper reality to that last one is that for many kids, that translates into apathy. As you're listening to this child give you their reason of why this thing they're asking of you is so important, just listen with compassionate neutrality. One of the biggest mistakes that we as adults make is that we have so much love for whatever child that we're helping. We have so much love for this child, and we're so impatient, and we have so much on us that we want to just fix it as soon as possible. We have it like that fix-it-itis, and we want to just fix it as soon as possible. And so we will try to turn a listening moment into a teaching moment. And we have to be disciplined enough and centered enough to be able to differentiate between a listening moment and a teaching moment. So even if the reason that this child is sharing with you for this thing they want of you is ridiculous, don't interrupt. Don't try to turn this into a teaching moment. Just listen with compassionate neutrality, without any judgment, and let them finish. When they've concluded, say to this child, "Thank you for sharing that information with me. It will play an important role in my final decision." And then when you render your final decision, if your answer is yes, explain specifically how you got to that yes. Explain specifically what made you determine the yes. If your answer is no, do the same thing. Explain specifically how you got there. The real reward for this child, everybody, isn't the yes, even if that's your answer. It's that you were specific with this child about your decision-making process. You were specific with a timeline. You gave this child a specific participatory role. You were specific with them about how you came to your final answer. And at the same time, you started inculcating them in the ethos of prioritization, how to think something through and determine why something may or may not be important. And you gave yourself the same wiggle room, as we'll see. You didn't promise anything on the fly and have to disappoint the child later. But by using specificity as your tool, you made this child feel validated instead of dismissed. So do you see how it works? Tenet number 2 of emotional credibility and communication, immediacy. If you're dealing with a child in crisis, particularly a child who's being bullied or ostracized regularly, this child needs to feel as if you have internalized the urgency of their pain. They need to hear words like right now, today, this afternoon. And another thing too is one of the biggest, most well-intentioned and loving of mistakes that so many of us adults make when we work with a bully child or any child in crisis is we'll say to that child, calm down. Now, when we say it to this child, we mean it lovingly because we hate to see them in such distress. But from the child's perspective, it makes them feel judged. It makes that child feel as if you're judging their internal experience, that I am the adult and I think you need to calm down. Even though that's not how we mean it, I cannot tell you how many kids have told me that every time an adult says that to them, they feel judged. And I felt judged in those situations too when I was a kid. A far better approach, instead of demanding the child or commanding the child to calm down, is to engage in an exercise with them that helps them to do it. Because let me ask you this, as an adult, imagine that a time when you were upset. Let's say you were really upset about something at work and you came home and you shared it with your significant other and you were really freaked out and upset, and your significant other looked at you and said, calm down. Are you going to calm down, or is it just going to make you feel more frustrated and less understood? There's lots of ways you can get a child to calm down. My favorite is any centering exercise. What I'll normally do, like with a teenager, and as you can imagine, I'm having to help a lot of teens calm down all the time in the context of my anti-bullying activism, is I'll say, okay, let's take a big deep breath. Hold it, hold it, hold it. And I want you to think about what's bothering you. Come on. I want you to think about this and hold it. Hold that breath. Come on, come on. And now let's let it out. And I want you to breathe out all that pain. I want you to breathe it out. Okay, again, there are many exercises. And if any of you are therapists or counselors, you probably have a dozen at your fingertips, but better to find a way to engage in a calming exercise with this child than simply telling them to calm down. And also, some kids, if you're teachers or counselors, you know this, or even parents, some kids are perennially needing your attention. Some kids are always disruptive in class. It's like they have this sort of attention tapeworm, and their hunger for attention never subsides. If you have a child or if you have a student who's always vying for your attention, and if you were, and you're thinking to yourselves, geez, if I deal with everything they need using this immediacy tenet, I'll never have any peace, I'll never get anything done. Look at me, here's the thing. If you do have a child who's chronically vying for attention, that's indicative of a deeper hunger. Something's going on there. So before becoming annoyed by the behavior, seek to figure out the hunger that's causing the behavior and work backwards from there. And the third tenet of emotional credibility and communication, and my favorite as a professional writer, is semantics and positioning. Simply put, present it the way you want it perceived. For example, sometimes when we express ourselves, we think we're saying what we mean, we're really not. And kids are so sensitive to literal interpretations of words. So here are some word swaps that I encourage all of you to consider that I try to use in my daily conversations. For example, I don't like the word problem because the word problem makes us retreat. It makes us go like this. I prefer the term challenge because challenge makes us want to rise to the challenge. I also don't love the word solution because solution is sort of bad expectation management, because think about it. Solution puts all of our focus on the end result, which is really what we have the least control over. I prefer the term plan of action because plan of action focuses all our energy on what we can do together in the here and now to change or improve the situation. Its focus is on the journey and not the end result of what we hope that journey will achieve. Also relevant to positioning and semantics. I always think it's wonderful if we as adults can do this, and then we can teach it to the children we love, turning problem statements into a challenge statement. So for example, let's say that you have a child and your child is flunking math. So you ask your child, well, talk to me. What's the issue? And your child says, well, I'm flunking math because the teacher is boring. That's a problem statement. A problem statement is a statement of what's wrong. A challenge statement is a statement of what we can do together to change or improve the situation. So the challenge statement, turning that problem statement into a challenge statement, the challenge statement for that would be, we need to come up with 3 exciting ways to get you engaged and excited about the wonder and magic of math in your life. Or we need to come up with a creative way to get you excited about the wonder and magic of math in our daily lives. It's simple, and practice this at home with your kids, turning problem statements into challenge statements. So that gives you an idea of the power of semantics and positioning. And we'll delve into that more over the next few minutes as we move forward. The third tenet of emotional credibility in communication. Oh, before I forget, it's the end of the day here. I've been going all day. Before I forget, relevant to semantics and positioning, other word swaps that I like, and this is based on interviews with thousands of kids over the past 20 years. A lot of times we as adults will use the term discuss. I have something to discuss with you. And a lot of kids have told me, and I get this because I sort of remember feeling the same way. A lot of kids have told me that whenever a grown-up says to them, we need to discuss this, or we need to have a discussion, it makes them think they're in trouble, even when they're not. So a better, softer term that doesn't trigger that anxiety is talk through. Let's talk this through, or let's talk something through. And also sometimes the word but can trigger anxiety, and simple substitutes for the word but in a sentence. And you can't do it all the time, but strategically, I just use the word but, right? You can't eliminate it all the time. In situations, though, that are sensitive, or where you feel a child may be uncomfortable or nervous and aware more intently of what's being said to them, substitutes for the word but include at the same time, or that being said. Sometimes simply the word and will do the trick. All right, back to our tenets. So specificity, immediacy, and being aware of your word choices and how you present something, presenting it positively instead of negatively, can be game changers in terms of your communicational acuity when dealing with anyone, not just kids. So how do you intervene with a bullied child or an excluded child one-on-one while simultaneously reinforcing the 3 tenets we just discussed? Step number 1, you're going to sit down with this child. When you sit down with this child, be aware of your body language. You know, crossed legs or crossed arms, or slouching or leaning back. These all communicate either that you're not listening or you're not completely present. So when you sit down with this child, sit down, shoulders back, be comfortable in your own skin, and turn off your cell phone, have them turn off their devices, and let them feel that you are fully 100% present and in the moment. Step number 2, say to this child, I don't know how you feel. I can't imagine what you're going through. It must be really hard. And then let the child vent, let them talk. A couple of warnings. Sometimes when a child is opening up for the first time about being bullied, something else may slip out that may blindside you. For example, well, when I was cheating on the math test, Brianna came over and just keep going. Let that child keep talking. Don't stop the intervention. For whatever slipped out, just let that child keep talking. You can revisit it at the end of the intervention. But if you stop the intervention, or you show any kind of shock or judgment in your facial expression and your body language that says to that child, oh, you're in trouble, they may stop opening up to you, and you may never get to the bottom of why they were acting out in the first place. Just let it go. Let them keep talking. At the end of the intervention, you'll revisit it. And when you revisit it at the end of the intervention, this is a sidebar, when you revisit it at the end of the intervention, simply say to that child, thank you so much for opening up to me today. I am so proud of you. By the way, that thing that slipped out, let you and I come up with a 3-point plan of action on how we can address that challenge together. Turn the problem statement into a challenge statement, come up with a 3-point plan of action, write it down, sign it, and work together in partnership to address it. Be the advocate instead of the authoritarian. Okay, back to our steps. Step number 1, sitting down with this child, comfortable, open body language. Step number 2, I don't know how you feel. I can't imagine what you're going through. It must be really hard. And just listen. If it takes them a minute to open up, don't interject with an I know how you feel. Just maintain your compassionate listening posture, maintain eye contact, and let them open up. Step number 3, after the child is opened up, say to this child, let's talk about an action that we can take together today to address this challenge. Now let's break that down in terms of our tenets. Let's talk versus let's think about some things we can do. Let's think is too general. Let's talk, it's specific, it's an action. About an action, a specific, tenet number one, action that the child can say to themselves, the adult said they were going to take an action. This is the specific action they took, and this is the specific result. It has a metric that we can take together, reinforcing advocacy. Today, tenet number two, our immediacy vocabulary to address this challenge. Tenet number three, positioning and semantics versus your problem, which makes this child feel as if he or she is the problem. Let's talk about an action that we can take together today to address this challenge. Now, you've gotten this child to open up. You've promised to take an action. What action do you take? If you only remember one thing from our time together right now, I ask with all my heart that this is the one thing you remember most. One of the biggest oversights that so many adults make when dealing with a bullying-related situation, and it's so well-intentioned and it's so out of love, but it can lead to tragedy and is this. You find out your child is being bullied or ostracized. And because you love this child so much, you immediately spring into action with the school. You talk to the principal and the superintendent, and you demand a meeting with the parents of the bullies. And the whole focus is on appropriate punishment for the bullies. That's all anyone can focus on. And everything else sort of becomes secondary because everyone is focused on appropriate punishment for the bully. Meanwhile, over here, suffering from a loneliness that's inexplicable is that ostracized, bullied child. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with families and schools where all the adults were so busy trying to figure out appropriate punishment for the bully that in the meantime, the victim ended up doing something tragic or even final because their loneliness wasn't being addressed. The first thing you need to do before dealing with any of this over here is to perform triage on that lonely bullied student. And triage consists of one word, hope. You need to give that child hope that if they're not fitting in at school, that doesn't mean they don't fit in this world. And I always encourage anyone who either has children or works with children to do some research. Go on Google and research organized activities for kids and make a packet or bookmark what you find. Start with public, offerings first. The local library, the Department of Parks and Recreation. I mean, there are so many organizations that offer activities for kids. There's drama clubs and book clubs through the library and through the local park district. And then try private outlets, dance studios, rock fantasy camps, drama clubs, fossil hunting clubs. There's so many things for kids, and keep a list. And when you're doing the intervention with this bully child, share the list with them, or even hop on the internet with them and help them find an activity that they would be interested in joining. It will achieve the following. On the days when school is really lonely, that child can say to themselves, yeah, but I'm going to see my real friends at book club or play practice or dance club. Also, it will give this child more social confidence. And the more social confidence they have, the less of a target they'll be at school. Also, some kids who are bullied or ostracized all the time, sometimes they become so desperate for the acceptance of their classmates that they try too hard, and it sort of pushes their classmates away even more. So if this child is getting their need for belonging from their peers fulfilled outside of school, they're less tense and less desperate for it at school. And as that tension diminishes, their classmates often come around. And it will buy you the time you need to deal with these issues over here. Because I'm not saying that handling the bullies appropriately isn't important. Of course it is. But, or I should say, that being said, if you're feeling really good that you arranged a meeting with all of the school administrators, the parents of the bullies, the parent of the child who's being bullied, and everyone wants to work together, and you're feeling really good about this meeting that's scheduled for 2:00 on Thursday afternoon, and Wednesday night, that lonely bully child does something tragic, that meeting the next day won't matter much. So help that bully child perform triage first, and then deal with everything else. Now, how do you deal with everything else? What do you do if you're a parent and your child is being bullied, and you've gone to the school repeatedly, and the parents of the bullies are like, not my child, they're in denial? Or what if you're the parent and the school is telling you that your child is an elite tormentor, that your child is creating a lot of drama, that your child is mean and sending other kids home in tears every day? What do you do? How do you work with the other parents? How do you help all of the children? I'm going to share something with you. I'm going to dispel a myth about bullying. Bullying at any age is rarely, if ever, personal. The bully is almost always a child in pain acting out in a cry for help. If we don't answer those cries with compassionate, restorative forms of discipline, and they turn into howls, the challenges we face in our schools and in our society at large will continue to escalate to the point that we will all be unrecognizable to each other. And how do I know this? When I was being bullied, there were several students who really had it out for me. I remember this one kid, Jerry. When I was in the 7th grade, I defended a special needs student because he and his group of friends were being abusive. Jerry didn't like that because they got into trouble. So one day after school, in a snowstorm, he held me down in front of the school, and all of his friends gathered round, and he yelled, "Snowball fight!" And as he held me down, all these kids came with packed snowballs, and they started pummeling me with snowballs. They were going down my ears and down my shirt. Then Jerry yelled, "Let's tickle her, everybody." And they tickled me. And as my mouth was open, they started shooting the snowballs to see who could get them into my mouth. I started to turn blue and I couldn't breathe, and I started to pass out. They got scared and they ran off and they left me there. When my mom found me, she was furious. And my parents insisted I told the principal, and I did. The principal suspended all those kids in school suspension for a week. Jerry got an at-home suspension. And I remember my parents and I feeling good about it. In fact, my parents bullied the school into punishing the bully. 30 years later, the night of my school reunion, I found out that Jerry was mean to a lot of kids that semester, because that's the same semester that his mom up and left the family. Jerry had 6 younger brothers and sisters. The dad went into a depression, descended into alcoholism, and stopped caring for those kids or even feeding them. Jerry was terrified to tell the school because he was afraid social services would take him away. So he stole food from the cafeteria every day and snuck it home to feed his younger brothers and sisters. And after he served that suspension, he was so thin, he looked sickly. I didn't notice, and nobody else did either. How I wish I could go back to 7th grade and say to Jerry, Jerry, I know you're not this mean. Something's got to be wrong. Please tell me how my family and I can help you. But instead, all we wanted was that punishment for the bully. Nadia was a girl who went to high school with me. The meanest thing she ever did, she invited me to a cool kids party. It was the first party I'd ever been invited to by my classmates ever. I was a junior in high school. I was so excited. I spent hours getting ready. And the night of the party, the address she gave me, it wasn't anybody's house. It was an empty parking lot. And all the cool kids came out. These are the kids I idolized like celebrities. And they said, yeah, like we would ever invite you to anything. And they ran off and they left me there. And I can tell all of you that in that moment, I never felt so much hatred in my whole life. And I would carry it for decades. And the night of my reunion, decades later, I found out that Nadia was horrible to a lot of kids that semester, because that was the semester that her dad took his own life, and she was in the house when he did it. And her mom told her to just tell everybody Daddy died of a heart attack, and she never got the mental health support she needed. How I wish I could go back to that day in high school and say to her, Nadia, I know you're not really mean. I look up to you because I know you're good. And what you did tonight, I know that's not really you. Please tell me what's wrong and how I can help. But instead, all I cared about was making sure that she got punished, and she did. I'm not saying that if an adolescent or a teen or a young child is being mean to another child, that we should let them get by with it. But what I am saying is that we need to engage compassionate, restorative forms of discipline that help these kids access their empathy and develop it like a muscle. So if you're a parent and your child is being bullied, work with the parents of the child whom your child has been unkind to, and vice versa. We as the adults have got to set the tone for compassion and empathy, because if we don't set the tone, how do we expect our children to prosper? I'm not talking about even financially. I'm talking about emotionally and spiritually. I advocate a form of discipline that I call compassionate discipline. And I'm going to walk you through, as part of our closing comments, I'm going to walk you through how to implement compassionate discipline. And it's so simple. I'm going to give you a couple of examples as our big finish. Let's say, for example, you have a 13-year-old son, such a pleasant age. And let's say your son has been disrespectful to his grandparents. So you say to your son, if you're not more respectful to your grandparents, I am taking away your iPhone. So the next day he's mowing their lawn and watching PBS with them. That's kind of a bum deal for the grandparents, right? Because he's not spending time with his grandparents because he wants to, because he loves them. He just wants his iPhone back. So what precedent has been set inside of his mind and his heart that his relationship with his grandparents is of equal value to his relationship to his device and can be interchanged? And we wonder why our world is so messed up. A far better approach, hand that child a notebook and a pen and say, for the next 5 days, you are going to go out of your way to perform one random act of kindness for a different person each day. The first 2 acts of kindness has to be one for your grandmother and one for your grandfather. The other 3, you may choose your recipients. Upon completion of each act of kindness, I want you to write down in your notebook what it was, how it made that person feel, how they responded, how their response made you feel. Then I want you to hand your notebook to this person who will sign it, date it, and provide a cell phone number. Any recipients under the age of 18, parental signature and cell phone required. And I want this notebook in 1 week, young man. And I'm going to call these recipients to verify their compliance. And if I find out that you have not complied honestly, this will be the result. So many parents care more about being liked by their children than being respected. They want to be their child's friend. You have their whole lives to be their friend, but right now, more than that, they need you as a parent. Also, on a semantics and positioning note, just one little tip, and you can use it or not, it's totally up to you. I don't like the word consequence because I've had so many kids tell me they hate that word because it makes them feel judged. So if you say to your son, if you don't honestly comply with this, with this task, these random acts of kindness, this will be your consequence. Many kids have told me that when their parents or teachers use the word consequence on them, it makes them feel prejudged. Like you don't think they're going to do the right thing. So you use the word consequence to kind of intimidate them into doing the right thing. And some kids have told me, it makes me feel bad because I would have done the right thing anyway. A far better word is result because it's empowering. The child can say to themselves, I own my own result. I can own a good result or a bad result based on what I choose to do. Just a little tip based on a lot of feedback from a lot of kids. So, okay. Another example of compassionate discipline. Let's say that your child is not as compassionate to the lesser fortunate as you would like. Maybe you've heard that your child chuckles if they see someone at school wearing secondhand clothes or old styles because they can't afford new stuff. Or maybe they don't show much empathy if they see someone begging for food or money in the street. Now, what are you going to do? Ground your child to make them kinder or more compassionate? It probably won't work. This might. As a family, take your child to a food bank or a soup kitchen one weekend afternoon. And as a family, serve the patrons of this facility and ask them about their dreams and aspirations. Then ask your child to come up with a way that you as a family can help the residents of this facility or the patrons of this facility feel validated and valued on a human level. Maybe you rent a karaoke machine and do a karaoke day, or maybe you paint something beautiful and inspirational and hang it in the front foyer. But I promise you this, if you have a kid who's not as compassionate or empathetic as you would like towards the lesser fortunate, not as grateful as you would like, I promise if they're exposed to real people who truly have very little or nothing in this world, they are far less likely to be unkind or disrespectful to the lesser fortunate again. And lastly, and in closing, one more example. Let's say that you have a 14-year-old girl, and let's say that it's the beginning of the school year and she's having her first big sleepover of the semester and she's so excited, and you ask to see the guest list. And you notice that there are some girls on the list that are really popular and she's always wanted to be in their friend group, and you're so delighted for your daughter that they're coming. And then you notice her best friend since kindergarten isn't on the list. And when you ask your daughter, she gets defensive. What are you going to do? Force her to invite her best friend? I was one of those forced invitations in middle school, and I still bear the scars from it. A far better approach. What's the one thing that you want for your daughter? What's the one thing that we want for all children, really? We want them to be loved unconditionally, to know what that's like. Well, in order to be loved unconditionally, We need to have tolerance and compassion in our hearts. We need to be able to love unconditionally. Now, there's lots of ways that you can teach a child or show a child how to love unconditionally, but I'm going to give you just one example to inspire your creative juices. And as an animal lover, I like to use this one. So back to our 14-year-old girl and her sleepover. Instead of forcing her to invite that girl or saying how disappointed you are, maybe consider trying something like this. Say to your child, you know what we're going to do tonight? We're going to adopt a pet. Now, this is just to get your creative juices flowing about how compassionate discipline works. And then as a family, go to a nearby animal shelter. And when you walk in, say to the manager, our family would like to adopt a pet. And when the manager says, don't you want to walk up and down the rows of cages to choose your pet? You say no, because you don't want to reinforce that example of conditional love. You don't want to pick a pet the way your daughter's picking who's cool enough to come to her sleepover. You say to that manager, no, we want the pet who's been here the longest, that everyone else is overlooked, because you want to set that example of unconditional love. And when that manager brings out that pet, I don't care if it's a bald, toothless, flatulent, three-legged, 16-year-old mutt. You give it love and attention, and you let your child see what happens when a spirit who's been dismissed and forgotten the same way she is her best friend finally gets the unconditional love they've hungered for. If you want your child to be more grateful, the next time you're shopping at a mall and you see a custodian bending over, picking up garbage that somebody else carelessly threw on the ground, walk over to him, introduce yourself and your child. Thank him for keeping your local mall so clean. Ask him his name and a little bit about him. Then go immediately to the management office for the mall. Ask for the manager on duty. Commend the custodian. Tell the manager that you would like to write an email of commendation, honoring the custodian's work, and say, since we're here right now, we'd love to know the name of the custodian's boss and the custodian's boss's boss, so that we can do those emails right now, because your custodian is doing such a good job. If you're a school, if you work at a school, have the kids do thank you posters to the cafeteria workers and the custodians, and hang them in the hallways at school so they feel valued, and that sense of feeling valued trickles down to the students. The hearts of children are fertilized by the goodness in our hearts. Compassionate discipline. Parents, work with each other. If your child is being bullied, find out what's going on with that bully. The more you learn about their circumstances, the more compassion you'll feel, and encourage compassionate forms of discipline for your child's bully. And if your child is the bully, love them up. They're not being bullies because they're bad kids. There's something that they need. Fill it. Work together. Be what you want your children to become. I'll take questions now, and if anybody is interested in working with me or bringing me to your schools or your district to do my anti-bullying program, it's called INJA. It's not just joking around, and it consists of student, teacher, and parent presentations and lots of components. My website is jodeeblanco.com, and that's Jodee with 2 E's. And I'm here for whatever you need. And I'm so honored that you asked me to be with you tonight. So if anyone has any questions, share with me the questions and I'll answer them as best I can.
Thank you so much, Jodee. If folks want to put their questions in the chat or the Q&A, I'm happy to ask those so that we can, hear. Thank you for your compelling, concrete, and compelling.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, because it's hard for me to see the chat. I don't want to lose eye contact with all of you because as far as I'm concerned, I'm with you in spirit. I'm as with you as if I were sitting right next to you having a cup of coffee. So I don't want to lose that connection by, reading. So, so if you have any questions, just shout them out. And if you don't, I can continue giving you some additional tips. Okay, here's one.
We have one in the Q&A. So what should the child say to the bullies at the moment they are being bullied?
Well, what I always encourage kids to do is, number one, is to look the bully in the eye, because eye contact is important, and to look the bully in the eye and to say, stop. If they're young, let's say if they're elementary age, I teach elementary school kids to say, stop, you're hurting me. And then to walk away and tell an adult, because I teach little kids that tattling hurts and telling helps. So when you're trying to teach a child what to say to the bully, they have to understand what's going on too. So I explain to kids, and you can explain to the child who's being bullied, if a bully is mean to you, it's not because the bully doesn't like you. It's because something else is going on in the bully's life that's making them really scared and really mad and really sad. And they're bringing all those feelings to school. Tattling is just because you want to get someone into trouble. And that's not very kind. But telling helps, because you help the bully, because the adult will make the bully feel better. And you help whoever is being bullied, if it's you or anyone else. So I explain that as a matter of course. And then you say to the child, if somebody bullies you, if somebody is mean to you, look them in the eye and say, stop. That's really hurtful. Is there anything I can do to help you? You seem really sad and upset today. And then walk away and tell an adult. And I tell the child, the first few times you say this, they may continue to laugh at you or bully you, but over time, they may actually respond. And no matter what the other person does, you can't control what the bully does. You can only control what you do. And what you are going to do is to help everyone. And when it's an older kid, let's say from, 5th grade or 6th grade through high school, what I always tell them is to look the bully in the eye and say, listen, I don't think this is really you. What's wrong? How can I help? Stop. That's really hurtful. What's wrong? How can I help? And then immediately tell someone. And I have something called a conversation starter card. And this is how I encourage kids. I provide these starter cards to kids, and then all they have to do is fill in the blank. And this is how you tell. You use an I statement when you tell. So let's say I'm Amber and I'm being bullied. This is how I would. When Brianna did this, one sentence, this is how it made me feel, one sentence, and this is why it made me feel this way, one sentence. All right. Number one, you write down your I statement, and then you can go to adult and you fill in the blank like this. So you'd say to your principal, Mrs. Smith, I'm not coming to you to get this person into trouble. I'm coming to you because I think they may already be in trouble and are hurting on the inside. When Brianna Jones did this, this is how it made me feel, and this is why it made me feel this way. Please, will you talk to Brianna and help her stop hurting inside so that she stops hurting me and others? And if there's a way that I can help, please let me know that too. So that way kids see telling as an act of compassion and heroism, and not that of a tattletale or a snitch. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. A couple of other questions. What do you suggest when the parents of the bully are bullies as well?
Well, that's interesting. One of my most popular professional development sessions that I've done for, quite literally hundreds of schools, is how to work in partnership with challenging parents, or how to work with parents who bully the school or bully other parents. Number one, curiosity leads to compassion. The more you understand about what's going on, the more compassion you will feel. If you have a parent who's a bully themselves, it's usually because something is going on that you're not aware of. There could be a divorce going on, or a drug issue, or financial issues. Something is going on in that household that you may not be aware of, and it's making the parent defensive. So if there's a school involved, the best way to deal with it is to call the principal. Make sure you have your child's I statements, that you have documentation of the incidents of bullying. And that documentation should consist of, number one, the child's I statement, as I just articulated, when the incident happened, if there were any witnesses, and the day, the date, where, when, and if there were any witnesses, and the child's quoted I statement. And you share this documentation with the principal, and you tell the principal, I'm not here because I want the bullies punished. I'm here because I want to help all the kids involved. The child who is bullying my child, something is going on there, and the parents are not responsive. How can we work together in partnership to help all of the kids involved, the bully and my child, and then work in partnership with the school? Privacy is overrated. Encourage the principal to talk with the parents of the bully, find out what's going on, and say, listen, the parents of the children that your child is bullying, they want to work with you. They want to help. They want us to work together in partnership. May I share with them what's going on? And encourage transparency. 9 times out of 10, that parent who is a bully is going through something awful of their own. And if they feel comfortable enough with the school and with the parents of the kids their child is being unkind to, if they feel comfortable enough to work with them and be open and honest, you'd be surprised what can happen. And lastly, if compassion, transparency, empathy, and working in partnership don't work, here's the second thing that you can do. A parent can ignore one disgruntled parent, but they can't ignore a coalition of organized, concerned parents. And chances are that if your child is being bullied by someone at school, they are not the only one. So ask your child to share with you if there are any other students at school who are being bullied by the same person. And contact those parents and say to those parents, look, our children are being bullied, and let's help the bully. Let's help our children. Let's help all these kids. And then document the incidents of bullying, but approach it with the school, not as if you're an angry mob ganging up on the parent of the bully, but rather that you're a concerned, caring coalition of determined parents who want to work in partnership, in harmony with the parent of this bully and with the bully, so that we can help everyone, because no one can ignore a coalition of organized, caring parents. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, so you actually just answered, several of the other questions, which was, what happens if the school, what if the school doesn't listen and the
Yes.
teacher and the principal don't do anything?
Okay, and here's some other advice as well. And remember, I work with hundreds of schools, okay? And I can tell you some of the typical mistakes that parents make when dealing with a school and how to avoid them. Bear in mind that for a parent, if your child is being bullied, it's a horrible feeling because you feel like you have no control at all. So, but if you call a principal and you're angry and emotional and threatening, they will completely shut down and you will put them on the defensive. A far better approach is to be curious. Find out as much about that bully's backstory as you physically can. The more you find out, the more compassion you will feel. Call the principal, submit your documentation, and say, I want to work in partnership with you in the school. Let's find compassionate, restorative forms of discipline. Let's work together. I want to meet the parents of the bully. I want us to work together in partnership. And because if the school sees you as reasonable, and if they see you as determined, they will work with you. And if you're really having a struggle, shoot me an email and I can always intervene. I do that all the time. Additionally, when you're dealing with a school, again, it's helpful if you are an organized coalition of parents that you lead with truth and compassion when talking about your child's bully. And here's how you do that. Step number 1, ask yourself, what is the truth in this situation? And be brutally honest with yourself, because most lies start as a lie to oneself. So be honest with yourself. What is my truth in this situation? Then ask yourself, what is the most compassionate lens through which I can see that truth? And then communicate it. Because if you see something compassionately, you'll automatically communicate it that way. And also learn how to respond instead of react. Step number 1, stop. Just stop. Step number 2, process. That means ask yourself, why am I upset? What is the real reason I'm upset in this situation? Then act with intention. Ask yourself, what do I want? What I say and do next, specifically to achieve in this situation? What do I want? What I say and do next to achieve specifically in this situation? And then work backwards from there. And your litmus test to make sure you've handled it well is ask yourself this question: 20 years from now, when I look back on this moment, how will I wish I would have handled it? And if your answer to that matches your answers to the previous question, then you are ready to engage with the school and the parents of the bullies. But I promise you, don't forget about Jerry and don't forget about Nadia. Jerry was a bully because he and his siblings were physically hungry. Nadia was a bully because she was in agony, because she lost a parent to suicide and was getting no support from the other parent. So before you decide that punishment is the only approach, work backwards, find your compassion, and lead with that. And I promise you, there is nothing that you can achieve.
Do you have time for one more question, Jodee?
I have all the time in the world,
All
dear.
right, so we'll just answer this last question. So how do you deal with a child who is vulnerable to bullying at school, but then becomes the bully with their younger sibling at home?
Oh, that's a wonderful one. First of all, if you have a child who is vulnerable to bullying at home and then vulnerable to bullying at school and then bullying their sibling at home, something's going on with that child inside. This is not a psychological term. I am not a mental health counselor. I am not a mental health practitioner. I'm a communication specialist and an anti-bullying expert. I can tell you this. There's something I call a lacuna. A lacuna is kind of like a gap or a hole inside a child's heart, and it needs to be filled with something. And just because a child is getting everything they want doesn't necessarily mean they're getting what they need. So the first thing that I would do with your child is, number 1, I am a huge advocate of therapy. Find a therapist, if you haven't already, that understands school bullying and that considers it a real form of abuse and that considers its impact, because some therapists still don't. Find one who does, and work with a qualified therapist or pediatric psychologist. I see a therapist every week for decades because it keeps me grounded. Number 2, talk to the school and work with the school And you should be doing two things simultaneously. Number one, find an alternative social outlet for your child, like we talked about before, where they can make new friends with new faces. Go a neighborhood over. Maybe there's a drama club through the park district, one suburb or one neighborhood over, where they can make new friends with new faces. That will help a lot. Also, talk to the school. Ask your child what they're most interested in. Let's say your child is interested in theater and they don't have a drama club and the school doesn't have the capacity for it. Talk to the principal and see if they could start a readers theater club and your child could be the president. Or maybe your child starts a Make a Difference club at school and you ask the principal if they could be the president. But find a way for your child to connect with other like-minded peers and to develop a social life. When they start to feel a sense of belonging, they are less likely to bully their brothers and sisters. And as far as the younger siblings who are getting bullied, help them to understand that if their older sibling is hurting their feelings, it's not because he or she doesn't love them, it's because they're hurting inside. So we have to love her extra and help her stop hurting inside, because when she stops hurting inside, then she won't hurt others on the outside. And I think the combination of those elements might bring you some helpful relief.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Jodee and Deja, and for everyone who joined us this evening. And thank you to the Miriam Fund for continuing to supporting our series over the last 3 years. And I have pasted the survey in the chat, so please fill it out so that we can get your feedback.
Well, I'm so honored, and it's Deja or Deja. How do you pronounce it?
Deja.
Deja. You, my dear, are an inspiration. It feels like I am looking in a mirror and never stop striving. It's funny because you're learning really complicated languages and that, are just in your heart. I did the same thing. I'm not Greek. I don't have any Greek blood. And I learned to read, write, and speak Greek because I loved ancient Greece so much. I learned modern Greek. So you are like my soul sister, and you are going to change the world. And if there's any way that I can ever support you or write a letter of recommendation for you or give you any kind of a referral, you just get in touch with me. It would be my honor and my privilege.
Thank you so much. It was a big pleasure meeting you. I do want to say, I hope it's not so obvious. I did shed a few tears because as a bullied child, the number one thing you hear people say is, I understand, I know what you feel, I know what it feels like, they're just jealous of you. That's the number one thing that people always say to you. And I understand maybe, but at the same time, that's not going to change anything. That does not change the fact that when I go to school, I'm still alone. That's not going to change the fact that no one gets to talk to me. And people, I feel like that's a routine. I think it's a routine that people just pick up. And honestly, it felt so nice to see someone finally understand what I want to hear and what I don't want to hear. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. And everybody, please feel free to contact me. It's JODEE at JODEEBLANCO.com. And I don't have a huge staff. It's just me, and I respond to them. And Deja, you are going to knock it out of the park, and I am happy to help you do it. So everybody, from my heart, thank you. And I hope to hear from all of you. And if there's anything else I can do for Gateways, you have my heart, you have my phone number. We can take it from there.
Thank you, Jodee. And thank you, Deja.
Bye.